Hello, how are you? Welcome to my modern Angular 19 crash course. Now, Angular has been changing quite a lot recently, and there have been a study of new features since the past few years. This course is meant to collect all of those modern Angular 19 features and showcase to you how to build an Angular app in the modern way. In the process of this course, we are going to create a simple e-commerce application. As you can see here, it is a two-page e-commerce application where you can go to the cart and you can go to the products list. And if I take you to this diagram here, which I built for you guys specially, you can see that you're going to learn a lot of things. So this product list has been displayed by using the new for control flow, which is also a new feature. Then we have string interpolation for dynamic data, which is one of the basic features of Angular. And then we have creation of a reusable button component, which we actually use throughout the application here. And then we have these stock indicators, which actually show you how to use the if control flow and the conditional styling. So you can see here that this product is out of stock, so we needed to show it in a red color to make it easier for the user. And then we have simple routing, so we can go to the cart here and we can also add to cart so that it's going to update the number of items in the cart. This we are doing through use of a global service, so we are also going to cover services and dependency injection on a very basic level so that we can manage our state in an Angular application. And then we're going to cover some basic create and delete operations. So we are creating a cart item here. And when we go in our cart here, we can see that we are displayed our cart items here, and then we can remove any item if you like to, and it's going to update the number and everything will remain interactive. All right. So lastly, we are also going to cover the computeds, which are a new feature using the signals API. So if you have 3 items here and you need to calculate the total, computeds is a really nice way to keep a reactive data which derives from all of these values. So if you remove this, you can see that it updates in real time this total here. So this is the concept of a computed or derived signal in Angular. All right. So who is this course for? Well, I have designed it basically for beginners who are coming from some other framework like React and Vue, or if they are just coming from vanilla Java, you just need to have HTML, CSS, and JavaScript knowledge, and you are going to be good to go. And even for experienced developers, I think this might be useful because you might find out about new stuff that has come into Angular, the new APIs, the Signals API, the inject function, the standalone components, and the control flow changes. So there are lots of things that have been introduced recently, and this might be a good course to get up to speed with them. Okay, so let's first start by installing Angular, because if you're starting Angular for the first time, this might be a challenge as well. So first of all, we need to install Node. If you haven't worked with any frameworks in the past, any JavaScript frameworks or JavaScript packages, so you need to go to nodejs.org and you need to download Node.js on your own platform, whatever it is, Windows, Mac, whatever. And once you download this, you are going to get the Node package manager within that as well, which is a way to install dependencies. We are going to use it to install the Angular CLI so that we can create new applications in Angular and do all of the other stuff that we need within the application as well. Okay. So we need to download this. Now I've already downloaded it. So the next thing we need to do is to go in our terminal, whatever terminal you have, and do npm install and then globally the Angular CLI. Now this is going to install your Angular command line interface package, which we are going to use to create applications and to also create components, services, and all of the other boilerplate load that we need for Angular inside of the application. So since this is already installed, we have already done. And then next we need to just check whether it's installed correctly by doing ngv. And here you can see that now Angular CLI gives a version of 19.0.2, which is the version that has been released just a week ago, I guess. Okay, next let's create a new Angular project using the CLI that we just installed. So I've gone into my projects folder where I keep all of my projects, and I'm just going to do ng new, and then we give the Angular project name. So in my case, I'm just going to give it Angular ecom, something like this. And then we can give various parameters to this CLI command, which is going to configure our Angular application according to our needs. So in my case, my personal favorite is to keep inline styles and inline templates and then skip tests. Okay. Now for skip test, this means that it's going to avoid creating new files for testing, because currently we don't need it. And for inline style and inline template, I'm going to tell you more about it in a bit when we go on to the process of creating components in our Angular application. All right, let's just go with it for now. Okay, and then it gives you a bit of options that you can choose. So it asks you which form of style sheets that you are going to use. So we are going to use SAS, which is fine for us. And then it says that you want to enable server-side rendering. Well, currently we don't need server-side rendering because our e-commerce application at this point is just a simple client-side application, all right? And now it's going to create all the files and it's going to install all the packages. So let's give it some time. Okay, so I've already created the project beforehand. So I'm just gonna show you this project opened up in Visual Studio Code. Now you can use any of your ID that you need. I'm using Visual Studio Code because it's free and it's easy to use. So if we go in the files structure here for this new application, you can see that we have a basic source folder and then we have your app folder. Now this is going to contain your application, and then app.component is basically your root component, which is the main component in which everything else will be loaded. And then you have a config file where you give some app level configurations which are going to apply to all of your app. Then you have a routes file which is used to define routes in Angular for a multi-page application. And then you have a main.ts. Now this file is basically which bootstraps your Angular application and gives some configuration that we just saw previously. All right. And lastly, we have a styles.sas file, which is a global styles file. Classes that we create here are going to be accessible throughout your application and you can use it anywhere in your application. Okay. So this was just a basic rundown of our newly created Angular application. Let's move on to actually start coding. Okay, so let's start with the basic concept of Angular components. So Angular components are basic building blocks of our Angular application. Everything in Angular is actually made up of components. So we have at the root of our Angular application the root component, which is usually named app component. You can also name it anything else that you want, but by default it is the app component. And every component now in Angular, whether small or big, has three different parts to it. The first part is the template, which is basically the HTML part of an Angular component, which is just like HTML, just like you write normal HTML. Then we have the style section, all right? So this style section is, you can also keep it like this, and you can define any class names here, which you want to use in your component here. And each component can have its own set of styles, which are only limited to that component. Then the third part is the actual class of the component, which will contain our TypeScript code. All right, so these are the three parts that are defined for an Angular component. You might not need the styles, but you will definitely need a template and the code for each component. Now, in this crash course, I have kept this as an inline style. As you can see, the styles are defined inside of the component decorator here, and the template as well, inline template, which is defined inside of the component decorator here itself. But some developers also follow the practice that the template is basically a separate HTML file and the styles are a separate CSS file. So it's all a personal preference, but my personal preference is this. So I'm going to follow this pattern throughout this application. Okay, so we know the components are the basic building blocks, but how do you create a component then? All right, so let's start by creating a simple component which we will need for our e-commerce application, which was a header component. The best way to create a component in Angular is to use the Angular CLI for this purpose because a component requires some basic setup, so it automatically generates it for you. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to do ng generate component. Now this command generates a component at a specific path with a specific name, and we are going to keep all of our components in a components folder. So in this components folder, we are going to give the header component. All right, so let's press enter here and see what it does. And you can see that it creates a component file here, and you can see it goes in this components folder and the name is header.component.ts, which tells you that okay, this is a component file. All right, so great, we have created a new component. But how do we actually use this component in our main application and show it on the screen? So as I said before, that the app component is the root level component or the top level component. Everything else is going to be contained within that. So we want to use the header component that we created in this app component. To do that, what we need to do is first we need to import it here, components, header, and we're going to import header component, and then we need to also add it to the components imports array here like this. Okay. And then we need to use this inside of our template so that we can show it. Okay, we're going to remove the router outlet here, which comes by default. We don't actually need it here. So all we're going to do is that we are just going to do app header like this. Now, why did we do app header here? Because if you go in your header component, you can see that there is a property called selector. Now, when we need to use our Angular components in other Angular components, we can use them in the template by referring to their selector. Now, you can keep the selector in any format that you want, but the recommended way is to keep it app dash the name of the component. All right. So here we have app header. This is going to show that component on the UI. All right. Let's also remove router outlet from here from now. Okay. Okay. Let's save this. Now, how do we actually show it on the screen? So to actually show it on the screen, we are going to split my screen further here a bit, and I'm going to, in my command line, I'm going to do ngdev. This is going to start up our development server so that we can test out our application as we develop it. Okay. So it says here that it is now deployed on localhost 4200. So we are going to go to localhost 4200. And you can now see that there is a text called header works. Why is that? Because when we go in our app header component, the only template that we have here is header works. All right. So we can change it to anything and it's going to show up as it is. We can do hello. And once we save this, you can see that it shows up as it is. Okay. So if you want static data, that's really great. But what if you want dynamic data? Now for showing dynamic data, we need to declare some properties in our class here. So we can make it a normal property here. So let's say we give it a title and we say that this is my app. Okay. But how do we show this on the component in the template? So much so that when we change this here, it also changes it here. So we do that by using the concept of string interpolation in Angular. Okay. So string interp means that we are going to specify an expression in this template and we signal that to Angular by using the curly braces like this. Two curly braces side by side, and within that we give our expression that we want to evaluate. And then in this case, Angular is not going to write title here, but it's going to substitute this with the value of the title here. Okay. So once we save this, you can see that we can see the My Commerce app here. Now, if our data is dynamic, and mostly it is dynamic, so that means it is changing, this is actually not a best practice anymore. Post signals were, which is a new reactivity API introduced in Angular, this is not really recommended. So what is recommended is that you create a signal for that purpose. So what is a signal? Let's go through a bit of info about what a signal is. So the signals API was introduced in Angular version 16, and it is a way to add reactivity to your Angular applications. So the benefit of using the signals API is that it is highly reactive, which means that it also keeps track of where it's being used and not only its value. So whenever the value is changed, Angular basically updates it on that specific position on the UI, and it does not have to change anything else. So what are the three things that you can do with signals? So you can read a value. If you declare a signal like this, you can read the value by using the function syntax, just like you use a function. And you can create a signal by using this syntax. You can define a signal. Let's see this in action as well, and let's go in our code here. So if you want to change this title to a signal, what are we going to do? We are going to do signal, and we get this from Angular core. Then we can give the initial value of the signal by giving it inside this bracket here. We can also give the type of the signal if we don't know the initial value, but in this case we don't need it, so we're not gonna specify it. All right. Okay, and then you can see that it gives a warning here, and it says the title is a function. So it's calling it a function, but basically this is a signal, so we need to read it like this. And once we save this, we can see that it has Angular Ecommerce here, which is the value here. Now we can also update this signal, but we're gonna see more of this in a bit. The important thing to remember is that whenever you want to use any dynamic data in your application, in your Angular application, the best practice is to use signals for this purpose, because Angular is moving towards signals in the future and is going to also remove its default change detection. So it is a good practice to start using signals right away so that you can be future proof. All right. So we have our basic header here, header component here, and it just has our title, but it looks really bland. So what we need to do is we need to add some styles to it to make it look good. So let's say that we add some styles here, and in our styles, let's say that we want to add a header style here, header class here, and let's give it a background of a very light gray color, transparent gray color. And then the color we are going to give as black because this is going to be text, and a bit of padding. All right. And then we are going to apply this to our header here. In fact, instead of P, we are going to call this diff here. Okay. So we applied this just like we do in a normal HTML application. You can now see that the styles are applied. Now, the important thing here to remember is the concept of styles encapsulation in Angular. Okay. So if we write this style here, header here, and we use this here, this style is going to remain encapsulated. By default, it's encapsulated inside of this component, so you cannot use it outside of the component. All right. And this is usually what we need because we want to keep our styles contained. Now, if you want a different behavior, like if you want a reusable style declaration, which you can use throughout your application, you go in your styles.sass file, which is a global file I mentioned previously, and you can give that header class name here. And then it's going to be accessible in all components, including the actual header component as well. Okay. Alright, so this was just a basic of the styling and the style encapsulation and how to create a component in Angular. Okay, so I only mentioned the styling part and adding my own class names just to show how styling encapsulation works. But in actuality, in this application, I am going to exclusively use the Tailwind CSS framework for styling my application. Now, what is Tailwind? Tailwind CSS is basically a utility first CSS framework, which allows us to use utility classes in our HTML or in our Angular templates, for example, and we don't need to create new class names for specific parts of the HTML. So this makes styling really fast for us. And so I want to introduce Tailwind here so that we can move with this tutorial or this crash course really fast and style our application just as I wanted. Okay. So when we use Tailwind for utility classes, we are not going to need this style section for the most part. All right. So let's get on with that and let's install Tailwind. Now, to install Tailwind, we need a few steps, and I'm just going to show the link here, which is the official Tailwind CSS guide to install that. And what we need to do is we then just need to copy these commands here. I'm going to install Tailwind CSS, post CSS, and auto prefixer, and then I'm going to initialize the Tailwind file here. So we have created a Tailwind config file here, and in this config file, we are going to add a content section so that Tailwind can know in which files our content is. And then lastly, we need to add these initial styles in our global styles file. Okay, so we are going to go in our styles.sass here, and we're going to paste these here. Don't worry about these warnings, it's not going to affect anything. All right. Okay. And now, just as an added thing, it will also be good for you to have a Tailwind CSS IntelliSense plugin here. Aside from, of course, the Angular language service, which is required for creating Angular applications, but you could also, it would be also great for you to use the Tailwind CSS IntelliSense because it's going to suggest to you the utility classes that you need to use, and it makes it really fast and efficient as a workflow. Okay, so Tailwind is now installed, and now, so just to test out, we can just convert this header that we have to whatever we want here. So let's just run the dev server again. And you can see that the styles have already somewhat changed because of some Tailwind default styles. But we are going to change this a bit. We are going to remove this header. We don't need it anymore. And instead of this header, we are going to give our classes here. So we're going to give it a more slate color here. So, and then we're going to give a bit of padding here. All right. And then some horizontal padding and some vertical padding. And then we're going to give it a nice shadow so that it looks like distinguished from the main content. I think that's good enough for now. We can change the title here. In fact, the title is actually not dynamic, so we can actually just remove this title here. I just did it to showcase to you how signals work, but you can then replace this pretty easily with a span here perhaps, and I can write my store as you saw in my original example. All right. So our header looks much better than before. And this is also a test that our Tailwind integration is working. All right. Okay, so next we want to create a cart component or a cart button at the top. This will be our primary button, so it's going to be used in other places as well. So we want to make it reusable, and we want to add inputs and outputs to this button so that we can keep it wherever we want to, and we can just give the input and get the output back. So this will be a good way to learn about reusable components in Angular, okay? So let's go back to our code, and you can see that we have the header here. How do we create a new component? Well, I'm going to create a new terminal here so that I can use the Angular CLI to do so, just like before. And let's do ng generate component. And in our components folder that we had, we are going to create a component but called primary button, all right? Now, primary button is a main button, so it is going to be a button which is prominent, which has a specific look and feel. Once we press enter here, it's going to create this button in our components, and then we can simply import this component by using app primary button here. You can see that as soon as I pressed enter here, it automatically imported this, so this really speeds up your workflow. And also, you can see that it also added it to the imports here, all right? And when we save this, you can see that it doesn't appear that nicely, so we're just going to style it up a bit. So we're going to convert this into a flex, and we're going to do justify between so that we can have a space between them. Let's save this, and now you can see that the location is fine. Now let's go in our primary button and let's add our specific styles to it. So this is going to be a button component in HTML because we want to keep it semantic as much as possible, and then we want to give it some styles. But before we add the styles, I want to also add the inputs and the outputs for this. So what would be the name of the button here, the caption of the button? Now we want to keep it configurable because we want to use this in different places of the application. So in order to do that, we can use the concept of inputs of a component, okay? Now the newest way to declare inputs for an Angular component is to use signal inputs, all right? So what we're going to do is that we are going to do label is equals to input, and this input you can see that is imported from Angular core. So we're going to click on this, and then we are going to specify just an empty string. This empty string is going to tell it that, okay, the type of this is a string, all right? And then within this button here, we can actually use string interpolation again and use the label signal here, okay? Now, since this is a signal, we can be rest assured that whenever this changes, it's going to show up wherever we are listening for that signal's value, okay? But what if a user clicks on the button? How do we want to handle that? What are we going to tell Angular to actually handle that? So Angular basically provides some sort of wrappers around the basic HTML event listeners, you can say. So for example, on click becomes click here with a normal bracket here, and we can then give an event handler a function here, okay? So let's give it a function here initially. Let's see handle button click here, and let's give this click here, okay? So when the user clicks on the button, it's going to call the handle button click event handler, and in this handle button click event handler, we want to do something here. So we can do console.log button clicked here, just as my AI is suggesting. By the way, my AI that I'm using here, the code completion is Super Maven free tier. So it's a free plugin which is really handy when you want to create apps quickly, all right? So once you save this, you can now see that we have our button here, but the label is not showing. So we want to go back to our header component, and we want to give the input here. Now we can give an input just as a string, as a normal string value, or we can also give it as a dynamic value. All right, so to give it a normal string, we can just give it something like this. And once we save this, you can see that you're going to see the card button here, and you can see that it's a button because it's allowing it to be clicked here, okay? And then let's also see whether the click event works here. So if you go in your console here and you click on cart here, you can see that you have button clicked displayed here. So this means that that event handler is also working. But what we actually need is we want to send this event back to our header component or whatever component is using the button, all right? Because we want to make it reusable. So let's go in our primary button here and let's declare an output. Now an output is something that a component gives back. It can contain some values within it as well, but in our case, it's just a button click event. So we are going to write it something like this, button clicked, and we're going to use the output function in Angular core here. And since it's empty, we're not going to send anything. We can then write button clicked dot emit here. This dot button click dot emit. Now emit means that it's going to emit this click event when we actually click on the button here. All right. Now to make this short, we can also remove this here, and we can just simply do button clicked dot emit here. Okay. This is also going to work. All right. So this is a way to avoid creating event handlers for every little thing. You can directly give it in your template. All right. So let's save this. And now we are going to go in our header, and we can now listen to this event in our header here. So how do we do that? We use the same notation as I showed you for the click event or the button, but that was a native event for any element. So that was an on-click event translated to a click event. But in this case, this is our custom event. So this will have a custom name, and the custom name is suggested as you can see here. So button clicked is equals to, and now we can do whatever we want. So we can now call another function here. So show button click maybe, and then we can create this in our header component instead. So show button clicked, and it says console.log clicked. And now we can test it out, and you can now see whether this works or not. Let's click on this, and you can see that it gives the clicked console.log message here. So this event handling works, and now we can use this button wherever we want to use in our application just by changing these parameters of the label and the button click event here. Okay, just one more thing. I mentioned that we can give the string here. Now what if we don't want to give a string here? We can also give something dynamic. We can also give a signals value here as well. But for that, we'll need to change this label to be within square brackets. And if we make this square brackets, in fact, if you make any of the HTML properties here anywhere as square brackets, that means it is going to accept an expression here. All right. So it's giving an error here because it says that our component does not have any cart variable that we can use. So if we, for example, specify any signal here just to test it out, we can actually see that we can use this signal directly in the signal value directly in this label. And whenever this changes, this is going to update itself. So this is a handy sort of rule to follow. So whenever you have the square braces, that means it's a dynamic expression. And whenever you don't have anything, that means you must pass in a string or just a single value like a number or something. Okay. So let's revert it back to cart just like we had. Okay. So you can see, but our button is really bad, appears really bad. So let's go to the primary button and let's style this a bit to what we want here. So we're going to give a background blue 500, but you can see that it doesn't look that nice. So we're going to give the text as white. We're going to make this as full width so that it covers all of the width. We're going to give a sort of a border here and some padding here and some padding horizontally as well. So let's see how this looks. So this looks pretty better, but we like some rounded edges as well. So we're going to do rounded XL and a bit of shadow because this is a primary button. We want to make this highlighted, and then just for an added effect, we want to make a hover effect as well, and we want to sort of fade it out a bit when it hovers it so that the user can get some indication of the button being hovered. Okay, so you can see the button looks really nice, and when you hover over it, you have this nice effect. All right, one thing you can see that it's not aligned perfectly, so we will need to go in our header component back, and we are going to do items center so that we can align it vertically as well. Okay, so now this looks really nice. And one thing we can also do is we can give this a bit of, in fact, Excel would be nicer. So this looks really nice. Okay. Okay, so now that we have learned about basic component communication, inputs and outputs, let's go on and see how we can actually display complex lists of data on our UI. So in this case, we need to show our products list here in this area here. So let's create a new component for that purpose, and let's do ngg component. And this time I'm going to put it in a pages folder. So I'm going to differentiate between components and pages. Pages are basically roots because this product list is going to be a root. I'm going to keep it in a pages folder here. So pages and then products list. And you can see that I used ngg. So this is short for ng generate. All right. So our new product list has been created here. You can see it's in pages here. Okay. Let's go in our products list and let's see what we have here. So here, the first thing we need to do is to actually define the structure for our products data. All right. Since Angular uses TypeScript, we need to define, or it's a good practice to define our types beforehand so that we can avoid major bugs and errors at compile time. So that's a really nice feature of the Angular framework, that we have to use TypeScript. So instead of using any, we're going to define our own type. And to do that, what we're going to do is we are going to create a new folder here. And let's call this models. And in this folder, we're going to define a products model.ds file. And in this file, we are just going to define an interface. We're going to call this product. Now this is going to have an ID, and then we are going to have a title. We're going to call that as a name. Then we'll have an image, which is also going to be a string. So it's going to refer to a URL. And then we have a price, which will be a number. And then we will have a stock. Okay, so this will be sort of an optional thing. So if there's no stock, it is going to consider it as 0. But this is going to tell us how many items are remaining in our stock, all right, for this product. Okay, so this is our interface that we want to use. Let's save this and let's go back to product list. So here we want to create our products here. And since our products list is a data which we want to show on the UI, and we would probably want to change it later. And as I mentioned before, for changing data, for dynamic data, the best practice now is to use signals. So I'm going to create a signal here now for that purpose. And here, because it's difficult to judge the type here, so I'm going to specifically tell it the type of product array here. Okay. And since we want to import it as well, we want to import it from that. And then we're going to define our initial value. Now here, we're going to just give a static initial value, but at the end of this tutorial, I'm also going to make it a bit more dynamic just to show you how to actually get data from the server. But here I'm going to just copy paste some default data that we can use quickly to make our app here. Okay. So this is some data that we have here, just 4 products, and all of the data, some have stock, which is greater than 0, and some have less than 0, so that we can actually test out all of our features that we want in our e-commerce application. Okay. Let's save this. Okay. So how do we actually show this list on the screen? Now for that purpose, Angular provides us the for control flow loop. Okay. So if I show you, the for control flow loop will be used to show the products here in the form of a list. Now, whether horizontally or vertically, it is still a list. So we are going to use a for control flow loop here. So first, let us create a container for the list so that we can style that properly. So we are going to create some padding behind it, and we're going to make it into a grid. And the grid will have 2 columns initially and a gap of 4, okay, between each of the items. Okay, now within this, we are going to then use the at symbol here. And if you are going to press tab here, you're going to get auto completion for the type of the syntax of the for control flow loop here. Now, this is a new thing. So previously we used to use the ng for directive, but now we don't need to use it anymore. All right. Now, so the items in our case is the product signal. So we're going to use the value of the product signal, and each of them is going to be a product. And then this track value is really important because this makes your list performant. So this should be your unique key. If you're coming from React, this is actually the key or the ID that you use when you show lists there as well. Okay. We're going to give the product.id as the tracking ID here. All right. Okay. So now whatever we put in between these curly braces is then going to be or as many times as there are items in this signal value. Okay. So let's say for starters, I'm just going to give a value here, and I'm going to use string interpolation again and just the title so that we can test out things. Okay. And once we save this, you can see that nothing happens. And why is that? Because we just created the product list in isolation. We have not imported that into our app component yet. So let's go back to our app component and let us add our app products list just below the header here. Okay. As before, it automatically imported everything here. Let's just save this. And now you can see that we have this list of our 4 products here. So the iteration works, but somehow our grid arrangement is not working. So let me just fix that a bit, and let me just put all of this in a div itself. Okay, and now you can see that it's sort of a grid layout, and it is showing all of our titles here using the string interpretation in Angular. All right, so this is how you do nice and simple for control flow loop to show lists of data. Okay, but this card, you can say if you call it a card, looks really bad right now. So let's develop this into a proper product card, and let's create a new component here called the product card. Let's do ngg component. In fact, we can do C here to shorten it up. And within the products list page, because this will be related to just the products list, I'm going to create a product card component. All right. And then instead of this div here, we are going to give app product card here. All right. Now we can import this also by using the code completion. The Angular language service provides a new feature here, which can automatically import product card from this if we select it in the quick fix here. So we can do that directly as well if the automatic import is not working for you. Okay, so app product card is here, and when we save this, you can see that we have 4 product cards, but we want to add an input to the product card so that we can send this product to each of this card to render all the items properly. So let's go into our product card and develop it into a proper card. Let's first define an input here. We're going to call this input as the product, which is being displayed here. And then as before, we're going to use the signal inputs. And here then we are going to give the type specific as the product so that Angular knows what to expect. And then initially it's going to be empty here. All right. Also, we're going to make it required, because if we don't give this product here, then it should not be allowed to use this card because we don't have any data to show it. Also, it's not going to give us any errors here in the template when we want to use this product value. Okay. So now you can see that we get an error in the product list, and let's go there, and you can see that it's expecting a product. It's a required input. So it says that it needs that input. So let's send that input using the square braces because we want to send a variable. So we are going to send the product and give in the product here like this. Okay. Okay, so now let's just test this, and let's use string interpolation again, and let's see if we can get the product title here again. And you can see that we get our product titles again, just like before. Okay, so let's now develop this into a proper card. We're going to add some styling quickly here. Okay, so we're going to give a background of white for the card. We're going to make it shadow MD, and then we are going to add a border to it, nice border to it. We're going to make it a bit rounded and give a padding of 6 here. You can see that it looks a bit like a guard, and then we'll continue to add a bit of styling to it. So we're going to make it into a flex and a column flex because we want to lay out items in a column format. And then we also want to give it relative, position relative, because we want to show some items as an absolutely positioned, mainly the out of stock indicator. All right, great. Okay, so now let's save this, and you can see that there's nothing here, but it started to look like a card. Okay, so within the div, the first thing then we are going to do is to show the image of the product. So let's give an image tag here. And as I said that we use the square braces for anything which is dynamic. So in this case, since we want to show the source of the image as dynamic, we're going to give is as product.image here. We need to give the value of the signal. And then we're going to style it a bit. We're going to give it a 200 pixels and a height of 100 pixel. And then I'm going to make this object contain value. Let's save this. Now you can see we have our images nicely displayed here. Now once we move this here, you can see that the image is on the left side. So we want to make it into a center. So what we're going to do is we're going to add another div at the top here. And in this div, we are going to give mx as auto so that we can center it center here. So now you can see that our items are always in the center. Okay, let's show up the rest of the information at the bottom here. And let's create a new div here, which is going to contain our information that we want. And it will be another flex and a flex column. Then the first span is going to contain our product title here. So we're going to get product.title. Okay, and this is going to be a text MD size and a font bold. You can see how easy this makes to style our components or UI components really fast using Tailwind CSS. Okay, and then within this, we are going to give another span here at the bottom, and this is going to be our price. But the price is also going to include a dollar here like this. So you can use any expression here as well. So I'm just using the concatenation operator here, and this is all going to be evaluated when it is to be rendered on the UI, right? And we're going to change this to a bit of a different format. So text SM, a smaller text file. Okay. And then lastly, we want to show the add to cart button here. Okay. We also want to add a bit of margin at the top here. So let's add a margin at the top here so that it looks a bit better. And then lastly, we want to show a primary button at the bottom here, just below this. So we are going to use our same primary button so that we don't have to add the styling again. So that is a good practice, and that is the best thing about creating reusable components. And let's do a primary button here. And in the label though, in this case, the label is going to be add to cart. and let's give a sort of a class here so that we can give some margin at the top here. Okay, great. So we have our add to cart button and our product card looks really good. Okay, so but this is the data that is always going to be displayed. Now there is one particular piece of data which is the out of stock indicator which we want to appear at the top here. But that data is conditional data. So that should appear in a certain way in certain cases. So how do we do that? Now to do that, we actually use conditional data and styling. And for that, we can use the if control flow. Just like we use the for control flow for looping, we use the if and the else control flow to show conditional data here. All right. So what do we want to do actually is that we want to have an out of stock indicator at the top here. And this is going to show out of stock if the stock is 0. Otherwise, it's going to show the number of the stock. Also, we want the color of this to be red when it is out of stock so that it is visually clear to the user that this product is out of stock. And if it's not, it's going to be green to give a visual feel to the user that, okay, this is available to buy. Okay, so how do we do that? So first of all, let's add the data itself. So we're going to make this data, first of all, just below everything in a span here because we want to actually position it absolutely. So we're going to position it something like this. We're going to use absolute positioning at the top and then at the right 3. The text is going to be of a small size and the font will be bold here. Okay. And then if now this is just like for, so when we do tab here, we're going to be suggested this here and the condition comes here. So we are going to give the condition of product dot stock. We want to check this. If product dot stock, that means if it is non-zero, that means there is some value. That means that we are going to just show product stock and then left. Okay. So left is outside of this because we want to keep it as a static text, but we want to make this part as dynamic. So this is going to be in the form of a curly braces here, double curly braces. And then we can also give an else condition here. So just like JavaScript has an if else, Angular also provides this if else control flow to speed things up. And we can now just say out of stock here if it is 0. Okay. So let's see how this looks. And once we save this, you can see that we have our data here and this displays out of stock because our stock is 0 for this specific item here. All right, great. Really simple and easy. But we want to also add conditional styling to it. So how do we do that? Well, there are multiple ways to do that. So one way to do that might be to actually give a span within this and to actually style it according to that. But I'm going to give it another way and it's going to show you a way to add dynamic styles conditionally to your Angular templates. So the gist of that is, as I mentioned before, any attribute that you give in square braces are going to be dynamically evaluated or can contain expressions. So now this class here, this is basically the styles that are added to this out of stock indicator all of the time. All right. If you want to make this dynamic, we can add another class here under square braces. And within this, we can add our expressions as we need. So let's add an expression here and we're going to call this, we're going to say, or let's make this bottom here like this. And we're going to say product dot stock. If it is non-zero, then we want this to be text green 500. This is the Tailwind class to make the text green color. And if it is not, then we are going to make text red 500. All right, nice and simple, just a simple conditional JavaScript statement here. Okay, let's save this and check this out. So now you can see that this class is dynamically added based on the value of the stock indicator here using the square braces given to the class here. All right, so this is sort of the simplest way to do this in this case when we're using Tailwind utility classes. We can also add specific styles using dynamic binding in Angular, and there's a whole guide on dynamic style binding on angular.dev, which is the Angular's official documentations. But this is the simplest case that I could think of, and it's good enough to get you started. All right. Okay. So from here on, our UI looks really good for the products list. Now we need to start adding functionality to actually add to cart here. Okay. So now we want to add the functionality to actually add our items to the cart, and so that we can show the number here and then we can also show it on the next page that we have, the cart page, so that we can show our list of cart items. So how do we do that? Now, the first thing we need to consider is where do we actually store that data of the cart data? Okay, so we have our products list here, as you can see. we have our products list component here. Now, if we store the cart data here, it's not going to be accessible in the header component here where we want to show the number of the items, and also not on the cart page. So we want some place where it is sort of stored globally so that we can access it wherever we want in our application in any component. Now, Angular Services is the perfect solution for that purpose. And if I show you the concept of Angular Services, it is of sharing the state and functionality in one place so that it can be used in different places in the application, and it uses dependency injection. Now, dependency injection is, in short, just a way to reuse some code or some functionality in different places in a single application, because we are using different components in different places. Okay. So the way to do that, the modern way to do that in Angular is to use the inject function, in which you just give the service itself, and by default, the service that we create in Angular is globally available, or it has a root scope. So you can actually use it throughout your application in any component. Now, there are options to make it restricted to specific components, but we are not going to cover this here. It's more for an advanced course, all right? So let us add to cart functionality using the Angular services concept. Okay, so how do we do that? Let's go in our Angular CLI again to generate a service here. And so we're going to do ng generate, and this time we're going to use service. We are going to put all of this in a services folder so that we can keep all of our services in one place. And we're going to then call this the cart service. All right, let's create this. So you can see that it creates a cart service, and let us go in our cart service from here. So you can see that there is an injectable portion here which says provided in root. Now this tells Angular that this is going to be globally available. So whatever data we keep here and whatever functionality or functions we keep here, we can actually call these or use this data and call these functions wherever we want in our Angular application. So we can use it in the header, we can use it in the products list here, we can use it on the cart page itself. So this is the beauty of using Angular services. Therefore, it is a best practice to use Angular services whenever you want to use any data access logic. Okay, so then what do we do here in the cart service? So the first thing we're going to do here is to define a signal which we can use to manage our state here. So let's define a signal here called cart. And this is going to be a signal, and the type is going to be simply an array of products, because currently we are just envisaging a single product at one time in the cart, just for simplicity purposes. Okay, let's import this from the products model here, and then initially it's going to be empty because we don't have any products here. Okay, how do we add a product to the cart? So we can create a simple function here. Since this is just a class, we can create a function called add to cart, and we can define a product here as an input to this function. And all we do is that we update the cart and use the existing cart value, okay, and give the product at the end of this array here, like this, using the spread array syntax here. All right, so this is going to give a new array with our product appended at the end of it, in a sense adding it to the list of items in the cart. Okay, so let's save this, and now we just want to use it. So how do we use it? As I said, we use it using the inject function. And let's go to our header component first, and we want to add it to our header component first just to see whether this works. So let's just do cart, and as it suggests, we can use the inject function and give the cart service here. All right, and then we have the primary button here, so we can give an expression here instead of this, and we can write cart plus, and let's also add a bracket at the end here, and within that bracket we want to show the number of the items in the cart. So we have our cart, and let's get the value of this, and then we are just going to show the length of this. We should probably name it cart service to make it more clear. So let's make it cart service, and then we're going to do cart service dot cart, and then refer to the length here. Okay, once we save this, you can now see that we have a cart with a 0 length, because currently our cart is of 0 length. It doesn't have any products here. Okay, let me just give a space here, just for a bit more space here to give it a bit better visual look. All right, it shows here correctly. We want to add each of the products to the cart and add handling to this add to cart button here. So let's go to our product cart. Okay, so we have our primary button here, and we want to add a handling here, handling case here. So let's add a button clicked here, and within that we want to actually use the add to cart function. Now we can also give it back to our products list because it's being used here. We can create an output and we can give it back, but this is just going to result in additional code. And since we have available the cart service which we can use directly and inject directly using dependency injection, we can very well go ahead and use that for our purpose. Okay, so we can just simply do, and we first need to inject the cart service here. So let's inject the cart service here just as we did before. Okay, let's import both of these, inject cart service, and then we are going to do cart service dot add to cart function here, and then within that we are going to give the product as suggested here. Okay, the current product. Okay, let's save this, and now time to test it out. So let's click on add to cart, and now you can see the number changes here based on the items in the cart. Once we click this, it increases here, so our items are being added to cart really nicely here. Okay, and it's accessible everywhere that we can inject that cart service. So this is a simple state management solution which you can use out of the box in Angular. Okay, now that we have our functionality for add to cart working, we need to add a new page, a shopping cart page where we can show our cart items. So to do that, we need to learn about Angular routing. Now Angular routing comes bundled with Angular, so you don't need to add any other external library. And there are three parts to it. So first we need to add our roots to the roots file. Then we need to add the router outlet where the root or the rooted component is going to appear on the UI in the template. And then we'll use the router link directive to actually specify which button interaction or what element should route to another page. Okay. So these three elements we need to add into our application. Now just a bit about directives. Directives are basically just components, but there is no template part to it. So the template part is minus in a directive. That means that we need to attach a directive to some UI element. So we can attach it to a component, we can attach it to an HTML element. And so we are going to see an example of this in the router link directive, and you're going to see how to import it and use it here. Okay, so let's see how we can add routing to this quickly. So let's go to our code again. And if we are going to go in our app.roots file, you can see that we have initially set up when you created the application. We need to define two routes in our case. So the first route is this default route and the home page, you could say. So let's define this home page first. We're going to do a path of empty string. This is going to define this, and just for the home page we also need to give the path match parameter full so that it doesn't get confused with other routes in our app. And then we can give a simple component property here, and we can specify the products list component as our home component here. All right, and remember that the routing part of our app is basically this area here, so it's not going to cover the header, so that is going to remain the same, and we are only going to add the router outlet to this area. So we are only specifying the products list component here, and then in the next one we want to add another path, and let's call this the cart. Okay, now here what's the component? We need to create that component. So let's create that component by doing ngrx a component, and in our pages folder we're going to create a new page, and let's call this the cart page. Okay, and in this component then let's give the cart component here which we just created. Okay, so our routes are all set up here. We want to show that on the UI. So the second thing we need to do is we need to go in our app component, and you can see that we have our app header currently, and then below that the app product list. Instead of the app products list, now we need to write here router outlet, which is a component which we can get from by importing the router outlet here. And instead of this component, the Angular router is going to replace the currently routed to component at this place here. Okay, so this is just a placeholder. Okay, so let's save this. And now once you save this, you'll see no change because we are on the home page currently, and you can see that the header works, and instead of the router outlet we now have the products list component. Okay, so if we for example go here in the cart route that we defined, we are going to see that instead of the products list we can now see the newly created cart component, which will be our carts list. So this is simple routing working for you. When we go back, you can see that we can go back to our products and go back and forth like this. Okay, but how do we actually send our users based on a button click? So And let's go to the header then, and let's set up the button click here and with the primary button here. Okay. So now the primary button can do a button click event. That is one way to do it. But another way to do it is to use the router link directive. And this will be a good way to show the use of directives as well, which is an important concept in Angular. So for directives, we need to import the directives just like we do with components. So we are going to do the router link directive here. We're going to import this. And then since I mentioned that a directive does not have a template or does not have that visual part, it needs to be attached to an existing component or an existing HTML element on the template to add that functionality to that specific HTML element or component. So in this case, we want to add it to the button. So we are going to do router link like this. And in this router link, then we are going to give /cart, which is going to specify the route which we want to navigate to. So let's save this and let's see if this works. And now when we click on cart, you can see that we go to our cart page. We can go back here as well. Okay, let's add another router link to my store here. And instead of the span, let's convert it to a button itself. And then we are going to add another router link here. And let's send it back to an empty slash, which means the root or the home page. Let's save this here. And now you can navigate back and forth using this. Nice and simple. Okay. Now there are other aspects related to the Angular router, advanced use cases, but this is not the course to cover them in. Maybe in a separate course, we might go through that. Okay, so now it's time for some practice. So if you want to really get good at coding and get good at creating Angular web apps, it will be a good idea to actually code things yourself. So we have covered quite a lot of ground here to create Angular apps. Now is the time to practice. So let's create the cart items page by using all of the concepts that we have learned here. So if you want, you can pause this video and implement this yourself to see whether you can do it. We can create the cart items list, and we need to do that using the for control flow, as I just mentioned in a previous lesson here. And then we need to create a remove button, a reusable remove button, which will be visually different from this primary button, and then add the delete item functionality to remove a cart item from our cart service. So let's pause the video here if you'd like to. Otherwise, you can continue. Okay, so let me just quickly do that here. Okay, so first I'm going to go in my cart component here, and I'm going to start adding some styling here. So we add a container div here, and in the class here, we're going to add some padding. We're going to add a flex column to arrange things in a column format, and then a gap of 4. Then we're going to give a heading here, and I'm going to do this as shopping cart. Let's save this and let's style this up a bit as well. I'm going to make this a bit bigger text here. Okay, just like a heading. And then below that, what we need to do is we need to use the cart items. So to get that, we need to inject our cart service because we already have that data available in our cart service. So let's inject that here. Cart service, add all missing components, and we are going to use the for control flow loop as we always do here. And let's call this item of cart service dot cart, and we are going to track it by item.id because we don't have any better way to do it currently. We are just assuming that only one product is going to be added at one time. All right. So within that, we want to show our cart item. So I'm going to create a new component here to encapsulate that. So I'm going to put it in my pages folder here in my cart, and I'm going to call this the cart item. So let's create our cart item here, and we're going to do it something like this, and I'm going to give this as item instead of this. It says here that we need to import this, so let's first import this from here like this. And then it says that there's no input here, so let's go in our app cart item and let's add our input here. So let's add our item input here. This is also going to be input.required, and the type is going to be the product because currently we are just assuming that we have only one product in each cart. Let's update import here and let's import the product here as well. Okay, and then we can continue adding our cart items here. Let's first save this, and in order to test this a bit, we can just add some initial products just to test things out. I'm just going to copy this in, and I'm going to go in my cart service here, and I'm going to give initial values here. Okay, just to test things out so that we don't have to refresh things again. So because once the app refreshes, it's going to lose its state, the cart state that it has. Okay, so currently you can see that it has on load, it has 2 items because we have our dummy data or static data here. All right, so let's go back to our cart item and continue styling this. So for each of our cart item, this is going to be a div here, and this is going to contain some styling. Let's make this BG white, shadow MD, border, rounded XL. So this is very similar to the card that we have on the UI, and the code completion tool is basically remembering that and suggesting it to me, as you can see here. So we can do flex, gap 4, and items center, right? All right, and let's save this. Now you can see 2 items because we have just 2 items in the cart here currently. Let's fill that up with our data. So the source image here is going to be item.image, and then this is going to have a class of a very small image, width of 50 pixels and a height of 50 pixels here, and then object contain. Okay, let's save this. Now you can see the item here nicely. Then after this, we are going to create a div which is going to contain our spans here. So firstly, we will have our item.title here. Then we are going to have our item.price here, of course, with the $sign. And then in this div here, we're going to just style this up. So I'm going to make it a flex and flex column. Okay. And this item, I'm going to make it as a medium sized text and a font bold. And then this price, I'm going to keep this as text SM. All right, let's save this. And you can see it looks nice. Okay. So now we also need to add the button here. So, and that has to be on the absolute right side. So let's add a div in the middle here so that we can push that to the right side, and we'll call this div as flex1 so that it allows the content to be shifted on the right side, the button on the right side. And now we don't have the button to show for the primary button. So we need a button here which is not primary because we don't want to highlight the remove button that much. So in order to do that, we are going to create a new primary button here. And let's go ngg C again, and in our components we're going to do a normal button here. Okay, so our normal button is going to be very similar to our primary button. So let's just copy everything here, and let's go our button component here, and let's do this, except for obviously the label. We can do the label as the input, and this is going to be a string, as you saw that. And then button clicked will be an output here. Let's import this from Angular core. Not going to be a BG blue, so we're going to remove that. And the text is going to be black because the background will be white. The width will be full as before, and there won't be a border here. We don't want the border here. And all of the padding is going to remain the same. The rounded and stuff is going to remain the same. But for the hover, we are going to make it a bit of a slate color, and you can change this styling as you wish for your own specific styling preferences. All right, so let's go back to our cart item here, and let's add this button here. We're going to do app button here instead of the primary button, and in this button we are going to add the label as remove. Great. So let's save this and now see how this looks. So now you can see that we have our remove button nicely appearing here. Right, but we need to also add the remove from cart functionality. So let's go to our cart service and let's add remove to cart functionality here. Remove from cart, and here instead of the product we can actually just give the product ID. So this is going to be a number, and we can just set the cart to an array which filters this value, filters the ID value from the ID that we get here. So we are going to get, in a sense, a new array of products which does not include that specific array. So essentially it is essentially deleting that item from our cart. Okay, so now we just need to go back to our cart item here and bind the remove button to our this, and so add the button click event here. Let's add the cart service here. Okay, and then we're just going to do cart service dot remove from cart, and inside of the input we can simply do item dot id here. Okay, now I've kept it purposefully very simple here so that our focus is more on how to do things rather than the actual sort of the mechanics of this remove to cart and add to cart functionality. we can obviously make it much better, because in this case it's not going to handle the same product being added multiple times. We might need to add some checks for that purpose. All right, so let's save this, and now when we click remove, you can see that it removes it and everything remains synced. So the card goes to 1, and then when we remove it again, the card goes to 0, and this is this. Okay, let's go to my store again and test it out again. So we add 3 more to the card, and now you can see that the card data is this. So all because of our services, we can now use our data across our application in any route that we want, which is really nice. Okay, now that we have our basic functionality complete, we can go on to do some bonus things. And one of this is to create the order summary component here at the very end, in which you're going to show the total and the proceed to checkout button. Okay, the best way to do that would be to use the concept of computeds, which is part of the Signals API, released as part of the Signals API in version 16. So computeds are basically derived state from existing signals. So since we have our values in the form of signals, or our cart items in the form of signals, we can actually just create a computed based off of those and calculate our total in that way, something like this. And the great thing about a computed is that it is reactive. So whenever the signal value changes, the computed is automatically going to get updated on the UI. Okay, so let's get about doing that. First of all, we're going to go in our cart page, and we're going to create, just at the end of this, we're going to create a new component, ngrx, and we're going to put this component in the cart component itself. So we will do pages and the cart, and then inside of this we're going to do order summary. Okay, so let's import the order summary here first. So inside of this we're going to do app order summary here, and let's just go inside that and add our markup here. All right, so what are we going to show here? Let's show a basic markup here. We're going to do a similar sort of design here, but it would be a bit different so that we can have the user focus more on that, because it's really useful information for the user. So we're going to do shadow XL, we are going to do border. All right, so you can see now that we have this sort of gray border here. All right, and inside of this we are going to first of all show the title, which is going to be order summary, and this is going to be text to Excel. Okay, and then within that we are going to then show our total and our total value of the order that we have, so that the user can see that. And we're going to add a div here. This is going to be a flex, and this is going to be a flex column because you want to show it in that way, and a gap of 4 to give some nice gaps between that. And then there will be a section of the total itself, which will be a row with a gap of 4. All right, okay, so within that we have 2 text pieces. One is just the label, which we're going to call as total, and this is going to be text LG. Okay, let's save this and see how this looks. So you can see we have the total here, and then right besides it we are going to have our value here. Okay, so what do we show here basically? So I want to calculate the total of the cart items here, and we want to use a computed. So how do we do that? Well, let's go in our component here, and first of all let's inject the cart service, because we want to get our current cart here. So just like before, we inject our cart service here, and then we are going to create a computed. We're going to call it total is a computed. Now a computed is basically just a function, and it's going to return whatever value we want using some signal value. And Angular is smart enough to recognize that there is a signal being used in a computed, and it's going to automatically update that computed when that specific signal changes only. All right, so in this case we just need to loop through all of our items and add up that. So let's create a total value here, and then we're going to do for constant item of this .cart service .cart. These are all of our products. And then total is item.price. So the AI is doing a good job in this. So total plus item.price. Of course, you can see now that we don't have the concept of quantity at this point. We can add it in a later version if you'd like to, but for the purposes of the simple app, we're just going to assume that only one item is being used in each cart. Okay, so the total is here, and then we're just going to return the total here. Okay, so now since we are accessing the cart value here, and this is a signal, whenever this cart changes, this total is going to get automatically recalculated and updated on the UI. So it's going to make it really reactive. Okay, so let's now go here and use this total here, since we also need the the dollar sign here, we are going to just show total and the value here. Okay, so great. The last thing that we need is below this div we need the primary button again. Okay, and this primary button will be proceed to checkout. Great, let's see this, how this looks. And you can see that it looks pretty nice. I think we need a bit of spacing here, so let's also add some margin top here. Okay, and one more thing, we also need to format this a bit more to give it a bit more prominence to the value. It's a bit too small. Okay, so let's make it bold as well, and you can now see that we have very nicely shown this thing, and you can see that now the total is appearing fine. If you remove a value here, you can see that the total is updated. If you remove it further, it becomes 0 here, and then when we go back and we add more to the cart, you can see that the total is calculated here. Of course, you need some formatting here. You can add all of that formatting here as well, but that is out of the scope of this project. So we have a nice order summary here using the concept of computers. Okay, so this is the last part, and after that we are going to wrap it up. So I wanted to add just a bonus section on how to use an API call, because we want to get in a real world application, we want to get data from a real server side implementation. So how do we do that? Just as a demonstration, well, there's nothing fancy about it. In modern Angular, you can actually use the fetch API, which is very common in JavaScript. So let's use the JavaScript fetch API, and let me show you how to actually set the value to our signal and update our products based on that. And to do that also, I'm also going to let you know a bit about the fake store API. This is actually the API where I'm getting the dummy data here from. So I've just copied the data from there, but now I want to connect it to this fake store API. So here I'm going to read the docs, and I'm going to go here to the part where we get products in a specific category. So what we want is we want our products, for example, in the electronics category. Here's jewelry, but we want electronics. Okay, so what do we do here? We can simply copy this, fetch here, and then let's go back to our products list where we want to load our products. Now I'm doing this only in the component at this point, but ideally, as I mentioned before as well, all of your data should be ideally in a service or in a store away from your component, because that is a best practice, all right? But in this case, you can really get it done just by introducing it in a component as well. Okay, so we want to add the fetch products, but when should those products be fetched? Well, every component in Angular has a number of lifecycle methods that we can tap into, and we can actually provide our code in that lifecycle hook so that it runs only at specific times. Okay, so there is one lifecycle hook called ngOnInit, and this actually gets called when a component is initializing. So that is exactly when we want our products to list to load. So we're going to add the fetch here, and instead of jewelry, we're going to make this electronics here. And now since this is promise based API, you can see that there's a then. So we can just use the more familiar and more easier to use async await syntax. So let's create a constant here and use the await function here for the fetch. And now hopefully my AI is going to suggest to me that, okay, how do I get the data, and then how do I set the products to this? Okay, so once we get the data and the JSON in that format, we are just going to set it to the data that we have. Now, since I have taken the data, the original data from the same API call, the format of the data is exactly the same. If it's not, then we would want to map it onto our type here, the product type here, by using a simple function, a mapping function, okay, in which it will handle things like, if some data is not there, if some data is there here, and match it up. Okay, so in this case, it's not really needed because a lot of the data and the names are also similar. So it's just in JSON format, which can be directly assigned to our products list here. Okay, so let's remove this products, the initial products, then just for the time being. I'm going to comment it out, and let's save this. And now you can see that there was a brief pause because there was a network call, and then you have all of your data, all of your products data live loaded from your fake store API here. Okay, everything appears fine, the images as well. The only problem is that everything is out of stock. Well, that's because the stock indicator is not actually added to the fake store API, and we only added it in our own product information. So we can change that, but it is out of the scope of this project. You get the idea of how to actually use third party or a network request or a server side request in your Angular applications. Okay. Of course, this is just a basic way to make network calls in Angular. A more professional way, you would say, which a lot of Angular developers have been using and also continuing using, is to use the HTTP client as well. But it's not strictly necessary in a signals world. And Angular is continuously introducing more APIs which actually don't require us to use observables and RxJS in our code, right? So if you're just starting out, just focus on fetch and then try to sort of get familiar with the more advanced APIs involving RxJS and observables as you go. All right, so that's a wrap. And where do we go from here? Well, we can keep developing this application and keep improving upon it. So if you want to convert this into a real world application which real users will love, you want to have a couple of these things that I've mentioned here. So you want to have a proper component library. So currently you'll notice that we created the button component ourselves. Well, that's not a best practice unless you are a part of a very large organization who want to have their own set of components to use internally. Other than that, all other projects basically use some other component library. There are several available. There is Angular Material components, there is PrimeNG, there is Ant Design, there is Spartan UI as well for Angular. So there are lots of libraries available. Pick one and then use that, because there's a lot of effort that goes into designing and maintaining these component libraries, and these components, custom components, including accessibility concerns. Okay, so you need your components to have accessibility built in and all of the features that users would expect. Then you would also have loaders and notifications. So if you refresh this, you'll notice that there's no loader here. So the user doesn't know. If the user has a slow network, he's not going to know what's happening. So we need loaders, we need notifications when people are adding to the cart so that users can know what is happening. Then we need server-side integration, of course, a proper server-side integration, not only about the products list, but also adding to the cart and deleting from the cart and then proceeding to checkout. This is a process which will involve the server. And of course, when we proceed to checkout, we want payment integration. How do we enter payments? How do we get payments from the user? That is also a thing that a real-world app should have. And then we have Angular forms, which we will need for entering our information for the user about its shipping information or maybe credit card information. So lots of things to enter when you are on a proper e-commerce application, right? And of course, other features which add some nice touch to your application. We might also need to add categories. We might also need to add other stuff. Okay, so a real world application will have a lot more. So I plan to create a full Angular material course on creating an e-commerce application, building upon this e-commerce application, using Angular material, using all of the best practices that people use to create professional Angular apps in the real world. But I want to know your interest as well, if you'll be interested in such a course. So if you're interested, I have here a link I've given in the description. This is a simple sign up for your email. So it's an Angular material e-commerce course waitlist. So if you will be interested in such a course and you want me to work on it, I'll really love to get your feedback and get your expression of interest sort of. So you can provide your email address here. I'll know that you are interested in this. And as a bonus, you will also get a 30% discount when I release this material full course on creating an e-commerce application. So if you are interested, do sign up and let me know so that I can be more motivated to actually create a full course on this. Okay, so I hope you got a lot of value from this small crash course on Angular Material 19, on modern Angular especially. And I hope you learned something new. And if not, maybe you revised something. So let me know in the comments how you found it, whether you like some more courses related to this or some other crash courses. I'd really love to know. Thanks for watching, and as before, if you have not subscribed to the channel, please subscribe so that it can reach more people and other developers can also learn from this. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.